Hey guys, welcome to the part 9 of my video series on unit testing in Python with pytest. One aspect that we haven't touched yet in the last 8 videos is dependencies. If a function that you are writing unit test for uses any dependency such as request library or datetime or let's say random, then there is a chance that your unit test might not always get the same output from the function which is being tested. For example, let's say you have a function which uses request library and makes some HTTP requests. So now if you run your unit test while having no internet connection, then your unit test is bound to fail as it will get connection error from the request library. That's why in order to gain control over unpredictable dependencies, it is better to test our code in a controlled environment where we can replace the actual call to a dependency with a mock object which will allow us to tweak the behavior of that dependency. For example, instead of making an actual HTTP request, I can just provide some dummy HTTP response which will be returned on calling request.get function in my code. Another reason why dependencies are mocked is because a mock object contains information about its usage which can be inspected, such as if you have called, how did you call, or how many times you called a particular dependency. So this can help us write our unit tests which are more robust. So what we're going to do in this particular video is that we're going to explore how to mock objects in Python for unit testing. So without any delay, let's get started. Okay, so for tutorial 9, I have already created a package inside my Python project which is called tut9, in which I have got my app package, in which I have got two Python scripts, dice.py and sample.py. So let's check them out. So dice.py is having a simple roll underscore dice function which simply returns an integer between 1 to 6, a random integer, by using the random.randint function. And then we have got sample.py which uses the roll dice function for its guess underscore number function. So it takes a number as input and it fetches a result from roll dice and it compares the number with the result and it returns u1 or u lost as the output. So this is a simple function and my goal is to write the unit test for guess number function here only. So now in order to write the unit test for guess number, I have to understand one thing here, which is that roll dice function's output is something which is not certain. It can be anything. It can be anything between 1 to 6, right? So when I try to call guess number function with let's say 3, then I'm not sure if I'll be getting u1 or u lost as the output. And when there is such kind of unpredictability, then I have to change that unpredictability to something predictable by mocking the behavior of my dependencies which are causing that unpredictability. So in this case, it is the roll underscore dice function. So I have to somehow mock the behavior of roll dice function. That is, whenever roll underscore dice function is called in sample.py, then it returns a certain value, let's say 3. So I will define somewhere that roll underscore dice should always return the value 3. So something like that. So for that, what we're going to do is we are going to explore the mocking library called mock in unit test library of Python standard library. So it is from unit test import mock. So this is the object mocking library in Python and you do not have to install any third-party dependencies for it. And now let us try to see how it works. Okay, so let's say I create let's say for example, let me just copy the definition of the roll dice function and then we will try to see how I can mock its behavior. So I have got roll dice function and there is import random. Okay, so now whenever I call the roll underscore dice function, I will be getting some output which is different than, which is random basically, right? So now how do I make sure that whenever this roll underscore dice function is called, it always returns me the same value, right? So for that, I'm first of all going to create a mock object. So I'm just going to call it mock underscore roll underscore dice. So how do we create a mock object? By creating a mock class object which is defined in the mock library. So it is capital MOCK. So now what happens is that I can do mock roll dice, so it is a mock object, and if I try to call it, then what happens is that again I get a mock object. So this is the thing about mock objects in general, that whenever you try to call them, then their output itself is a mock object, right? So that is the first thing that you need to understand about it. And also, to make things simpler, you can also define a few things inside mock. So let us try to look into it. So you can for debugging purposes, you can define name. So name equal to, let's say, roll dice mock, right? So whenever you try to debug your unit test, then that name might appear, which can help you in debugging your code. So the name of my mock is roll dice mock. So that is one of the things that you need to know. Other things we will try to understand one by one. So another thing here is that, let's say I want to actually return a particular value when I call mock roll dice, right? For example, let's say I want to return 3 every time I call this function. So for that, what you can do is you can specify return value is equal to 3. That's it. And whenever I call mock roll dice function, I get the output as 3. Now the interesting thing is that you try to see the difference between roll underscore dice and mock roll underscore dice. Both of them are returning a particular integer, but the way they are returning, but how they are returning that integer is something different, right? But what if I say that whenever I want to call roll dice, instead call mock roll dice? So in this way, I will have mocked the behavior of roll dice for me. So for that, all I have to do is, in my code, I have to just say roll dice is equal to mock roll dice, and now whenever I will be calling roll dice, I'll be getting 3 as output, right? So in this way, you can see that earlier running roll dice was actually running this particular function and returning a random value, but now it is always returning 3. So in this way, you use the mocks. Now the interesting thing about mocks is that you can see if they were called or not, or how many times were they called. So mock roll dice dot assert called. So there are many assertion methods which are available. So one of them is assert called once. So I am getting assertion. So I'm saying that assert called once, which means that I'm trying to say that assert that this particular function was called only once, but it had actually been called 9 times because I ran this roll dice function again and again, right? So I can just do assert called. So these are various assertions that you can do. So it is now not saying anything, right? So yeah, so you have multiple assertion methods as well to see how or which arguments were passed while running your mock. So these kind of things can be done. So yeah, so I think we have got some good understanding of mock. And now the important question here is that, how am I going to specify that I want to use mock roll dice instead of the real roll dice while running my function which I am trying to test? So for that, we have something called patch function in the mock library. So that is what we'll be using, right? So there we will have to specify the object that I want to mock, and then in the arguments of my unit test, I will get one parameter which will be referring to the mock roll dice, which will be the mock object which has been created for the roll dice function. So let us just try out all these things, right, in the real pytest unit test. So I already have a test package, but there is no test script. So I'm just going to create a new Python file which I'm going to call test_sample. So here I'm going to write the unit test. So I'm just going to call it def test guess number. So that was the test that I am trying to write. So all I have to do is assert that guess number when passed 3 is returning me u1. So let me just import this. Okay, so now if I try to run this unit test, it can either pass or it can either fail. There is actually some probability that is in play here, right? So if I try to run it again, it might pass, and yes, it passed. So one interesting thing that you can see is that you're seeing that it is rolling. So it means that currently we are using the random function only, the random not random, but we want to patch that with a mock object. So for how to do that, you can define a decorator or a with context. So we'll be looking into both of them one by one. So let us try to go with the decorator first, because that is the more preferred way. So @mock dot patch, and now I need to tell what do I want to patch. So I need to patch the roll dice function, right? I need to patch this function. So I need to provide the package path of this particular function. Now, one thing to understand here is that what we actually have to do is that we have to provide the path to the object that you are trying to patch, and that path should be the path which is in the local scope for that particular object. So in this case, the local scope for roll underscore dice will be tut9.myapp.sample.roll dice. So I am trying to refer to this roll dice function, not this roll dice function. So let me just show you so that you get a brief understanding of it. So it is tut9.myapp.sample.roll underscore dice. So that is what I'm saying here. And now whenever you try to patch any particular object, then automatically its corresponding mock object is returned or passed as an argument to your unit test. So here I will be getting mock roll dice. But the thing about this mock function is that it is the simple mock function which is having nothing special about it. Like, it is a simple mock object. You can say that mock.mock, something like that, right? But we are not interested in that. We are interested in something more. So we will be giving it some extra powers by specifying a few things. So I'll be just be saying that the return value for this mock is going to be 3 always. So now it will be whenever roll underscore dice will be called in the local scope of sample.py, then it will always be returning 3. So let us just try to run it and see. And look at that, my test is passing. And one thing that you can now notice that there is no rolling. So rolling is not getting printed, which was written here, print rolling. So that is not getting printed now, which means that we are actually using the mocked object. So yeah, so now just to show you that why it is necessary to refer to your object which you're trying to mock through the local scope, let me just replace sample with dice. So let's see what happens. So my test failed because it is not 3 and it actually called the actual function. So that is what we didn't want, right? So that's why. So I will keep sample here. So always try to refer to your dependencies used by your function through the package path which is in the local scope for your test function, for your function. So that's done. So in this way we did it. And finally, one more assertion that we can do is that mock roll dice dot assert called once. So I want to assert that mock roll dice was called only once. So actually there are multiple assertion methods which are available. There is something called assert called, which will raise error if your function has been called 0 times. So you are basically trying to assert that your mock object was called at least once. Assert called once will check that it was called only once. And then you have some other methods also where you can check if your mock object was called with some specific arguments or not. So we'll be coming to those later, but for now this is all we need. So now let me run it. So yeah, this is still passing, so that is fine. So this is test case number for you. And now let us try to do one more thing here. Let us try to parameterize this unit test. So let me just try to do it @mock dot paramet. So @pytest dot mark. So I'm just going to create a parameterized marker. I'm just going to specify a parameterized marker for this particular function. So that is going to be my input, right? So input comma expected. So input and expected are the two parameters and their values are going to be, so in the first call I want the values to be, let's say 3, and the output should be u1, and in the second time it should be, let's say 4, and the output should be u lost. So this is my parameterization that I've specified. Now you must be thinking, where do I specify these two parameters, input and expected, because they will also be passed as arguments to my unit test while it is run, right? So I can just specify them after mock roll dies. So let us see what happens. So this is input and expected. Let me just replace input with underscore input because it is shadowing the built-in name. So underscore input. So now replacing 3 here with underscore input and u1 with expected. So now let me just run it, and yes, my test passed. So basically whatever mock patches that you define, so the corresponding mock objects, you have to put them first, and in the end you have to specify all your parameters, so they will be specified like this, and then you can go ahead. So yeah, our test is passing. You can see that two unit tests, your unit test was run 2 times with different parameters. One was 3 and u1, and another was 4 and u lost. So yeah, so in this way I've written the complete unit test which is covering all cases. So yeah, now let us take one more a bit complex example, so that we get to learn a bit more, some more things about the mock library. And for that I'm going to write a function called getIP. So getIP function will actually return me the IP address for my computer. So I will specify it like this. I'll be calling the request library, and I'll be calling this particular URL /IP. So this is the URL, and let me just import request library, and now I will check the status code. So if response.status code is equal to 200, what do I want to do? So if the response.status code is 200, then I want to return something. I want to return response.json origin. So now let me just show you why I'm writing all this. So for that, let us try to go to this particular URL. I actually already have it opened. So this is http://bin.org/ip is a particular URL which returns you the data about your IP address from which you are making the request. So the output is in JSON format, which has a key called origin in which you get the IP address. That's why I specified it like this and trying to fetch the data. So yeah, this is getIP, and now I need to write the unit test for this. And again, the thing here is that I cannot control how request.get function will work without mocking its behavior, because it is making an actual HTTP request which can vary, or which can depend upon various factors like whether I have an internet connection or not. And in this case, my IP address could change with time, right? So considering all those factors in mind, I actually need to mock the request.get function. So how do I do that? So for that, let me just copy it and move back to the Jupyter notebook so that we understand a few things in a more detailed manner. So this is the thing that we have, and if I try to call getIP function, I get the output something like this. So that is fine. And now I have to mock the behavior. So how do I mock it? So first thing is I need to see what all things need to be mocked in my function. So the first thing that you can see that needs to be mocked is of course the request.get function. So the request.get function should be mocked, which means that when it is called, it should return something predefined. And now let us go to that predefined thing. So that predefined thing here is a response, and that predefined thing itself has two properties or methods. It has a property called status_code, and it has a method called JSON. So considering these things in mind, I think I will need to write a mock object for response as well, so that I can easily specify what should be the status code or what should be the output of the JSON function. So let me just write the mock for the response object first. So I'm going to call it mock response. Okay, and now I need to write mock. So this is my mock response, and now I need to write some things. So how do I define what should be the return value, right? So earlier we saw that the return value is specified like this. So that was when I was talking about what will be the return value when this particular mock object is itself called. But in this case, we are talking about the JSON function inside my mock object. So in those cases, you have to do it something like this: mock response dot JSON dot return value. There is a shortcut as well, which I'll be coming to, which I'll be talking about in a bit. So mock response dot JSON dot return value is equal to origin and providing the value. So that's fine. And also how to specify any property of a mock object. For that, you do mock response, which is my mock object, dot, let's say, status code, which is equal to 200. And now if I try to fetch those values, for example, I do mock response dot status code, I get 200, and mock response dot, let me just call JSON function, I get the required thing. So now if you try to compare this response with mock response, there is not much difference between those two. Both of them have a status code property, and both of them have a JSON function which is returning something which has an origin key. So yeah, and the interesting thing about the functions that you define for mock objects is that those functions can take any number of arguments. So if you just try to pass anything, it will accept that. So that is another interesting thing about the mock objects. So yeah, so this is how you do it. And now let me show you the shortcut for specifying all these kind of things. For specifying any kind of properties or methods or the return values for those things, all you need to do is that you need to provide those as keyword arguments to your mock object. And in order to do that, all you have to do is you have to provide them. So see, the thing is that I can do return underscore value, let's say return underscore value equal to 2. Okay, so the return underscore value is 2. So what will happen is that mock response, if you try to call it, you get 2. Now if I try to say status code is equal to 200, so now if I try to do mock response dot status code, I get that as 200. So this is fine. So any keyword argument that you specify and then you try to refer it through your mock object, then you can get its value. That is fine. But how do you define it for functions? So for example, in case of JSON dot return value, you cannot do JSON dot return value because this will be invalid syntax, right? So this is the invalid syntax, but you can get rid of this thing by doing dictionary unpacking by using double asterisk, and here you can specify anything that you want to tell. So status code is 200 and JSON dot return value. So this is basically a compact way of saying just this thing. So if you like being this much explicit, then it's fine, but if not, then you can then just try this compact version. JSON dot return value is equal to this dictionary. So let me just copy it. So that's it. So in this way I have specified my mock object, and now let me just remove this. So the status code is still 200 and calling JSON still returns the same value. So yeah, so in this way you can compactly define what all things your mock object is going to do. So this is my mock response object, and now I need to make my mock requests get object. So for that I can simply do mock requests get is equal to mock dot mock and return value. So basically whenever this mock object is called, what should it return? It should return a response. So that response should be a mock response. So that's it. So now if I try to call mock requests get, I actually get a mock object as output. And let me just give my mock a name. mock response. So now look at that. So when I'm calling my mock request get function, I'm getting another mock, which is actually this mock response object. So if I try to do dot status code, I will actually get 200, and if I try to do dot JSON, I will get the JSON value, which is what I actually need. So basically we have done all the connections that we needed to make, and now only thing remaining is that specifying that request.get should be a mock from now on. So request.get is equal to mock request get. That's it. And now let me just call get IP function, and here you go. You are now always gonna get 0.0.0.0. So in this way we have mocked it. So I hope you got the gist of how we are doing this. And one more interesting thing that we can do here is that I can just say mock request get dot assert called once. Okay, I have already called it 4 times, so let me just do it assert called. So yes, it was called, and now assert called with, and then I can provide the argument. So I want to assert that request.get was called with this particular argument, so I can just assert that, and yes, this is what it was called with. Let me just change it a bit. It's an assertion error. So in this way I can also assert that what arguments were passed to my mock object while it was being called. Okay, so yeah, so I think we have got everything that we need. So let me just write the test get IP function. So in my test underscore sample, I'm just gonna do def test get IP, and I'll be doing some patching. So at the rate mock dot patch tot9 dot myapp dot sample dot requests. So again, I have referred to the request object in the local scope of sample.py, and actually I want to mock only request.get function object, so I'm just doing request.get, and I will be getting mock requests underscore get as the mock object for this. And now I have to do something with it. So what do I do with it is I specify its return value. Okay, so dot return value. So whenever you have already defined a mock object and later you want to define its return value, then you try to do this mock request get dot return value. So it should be equal to what? It should be equal to a mock response, which is this. So this is my mock response. So just making it equal to this, or why do this even? Let me just not declare an extra variable. Let me just keep it like this. Okay, so I have defined my mock request get return value. So all I need to do is assert that get IP function returns what I actually know, that it is 0.0.0.0. That's it. So let us just try to run it and see if we are successful or not. So yeah, our test passed and we have successfully mocked the request libraries get function. And also let me do one more assertion, which is mock request get dot assert that it was called only once. So all these functions which are related to assertions, you can just check them out. There is assert called, there is assert called with, there is assert called once with, so and some more. So assert called once with, what should be the value? It should be this particular URL. So let me just copy it for now. That's it. So let us just try to run it, and this should also pass. So yeah, so in this way we have properly written a unit test for the get IP function, and we are able to test it without depending upon the internet connection, because we are ourselves defining what should be the response. So this is all we had from this is all I had from this particular video. And in the next video we'll be trying to see a few more things. For example, what happens if I am trying to make multiple calls to a function, to a dependency during my function, and how to assert in those kind of cases, and so on. So yeah, so we'll be covering that in the next few videos. So if you're still in doubts, you can put them in the comment section below. That's it from this video. Thanks for watching.